in summary, technology-assisted review, computer-assisted review, it's the same thing, different terminology, but effectively it's a process, it's not a technology, it's not a magic red button. I think in our experience, Susanna and David, we are going to be talking about Relativity's technology-assisted review, but there are other softwares that do the same thing. And I think effectively, and you alluded to this, Andrew, the process is summarised as having a lawyer being a subject matter expert, in the issues relating to identifying relevant and irrelevant documents, is used to train the software on the issues of relevance. So effectively, it's a process whereby that subject matter expert is presented with documents. They make a decision about whether those documents are relevant or irrelevant. The computer then takes that information and it goes out into the wider universe of documents and tries to form its own views. It says, okay, well, I think you said that was relevant. Now I think these documents are also relevant based on the information you gave me. Now, it's a process. It's an iterative process. Round one is training, but of course, you don't just sort of train it and it's right. You've got to check the quality of the computer's work. So then the downstream processes all around quality assurance rounds are actually, it's quite interesting because, of course, in the first few rounds, the software is just learning, so it will be presenting you with documents that it thinks are relevant. You then have the chance to tell the computer, well, no, I disagree with that, that's not relevant, and vice versa. The computer thought that document was irrelevant. Well, no, actually, that document is relevant. And that process continues until such point in time that you as subject matter experts are satisfied with the decisions that the computer is making, at which point in time you stop the process and sort of move forward.
And I'm going to ask the two lawyers in a minute, because they're experienced in actually doing that kind of training. But what else? I mean, is computer-assisted review the only weapon we've got in our toolkit? What else is there before you get to that?
Yeah, so it's a really good point, Andrew, that in Relativity's package, for example, predictive coding is part of its analytics bolt-on package, and that package actually comes with a lot of functionality. I call it a spectrum. So one side of a spectrum, so I suppose the far end of the spectrum is this computer-assisted review. It's whereby you're using the technology to train the software, but far down the spectrum, on the easier to understand side maybe, is that part of that technology you get a technology that identifies email threads, so we'll understand conversations. It will identify near duplicate documents. You can cluster documents that are similar. You can find similar documents. So this toolkit in the analytics package actually has a lot of bits and pieces, and effectively once you turn on the analytics package, once you switch it on, you actually have this realm of opportunities open up to you, with predictive coding being sort of the high end.
Yeah. And that's not just Relativity, that's most of the e-disclosure software has got that range of technology.
The spectrum.
But we want to play with the big toys. We want to, so Susanna, as ever, so you were the subject matter expert. Tell me, what did you actually have to do?
Yeah, okay, so as Andrew said, I was the subject matter expert for our case. We chose to just have one subject matter expert training the system to provide focus and improve the accuracy and number of rounds that we needed to do. So that was me. As Emma said, unfortunately, it's not as simple as just pressing a button. So it did involve me sitting in a room in front of a computer for quite a few number of days, sorting out the documents and reviewing them for relevance.
What was a batch of documents? How long did that take you?
There were about 1,500 documents in a batch.
Ouch.
Yeah.
And that's a day's worth of work?
I found, or about 1,000 to 1,500 documents a day. So it probably took about 10 days of me sitting and reviewing.
So you reviewed, and then did you have some time off?
Yes, after one batch that would then be fed back into the system and would be used to train the system. And then also after that had been used, I would have an overturn round, which is where I would review the system's decisions that it had made following my previous batch and work out whether I thought those were correct or not.
So were you consistent over those sort of 5 batches or so, or did you just end up second-guessing yourself?
No, I found myself second-guessing myself towards the end, which was the kind of grey area documents. So obviously there's some documents where it's really clear whether they're relevant or not, but there's plenty of other documents that are somewhere in the middle. So you will find yourself on day 10 looking at a document that you marked as relevant on day 1, and you're think, well, now I've looked at 10,000 documents in between, actually that one's not relevant now.
And what was the effectiveness? What size population did you start with, and how much did you cut it down to?
We started with 100,000 documents, and at the end of the process the system classified about 30% of those as potentially relevant. When we added families back in, that climbed to about 50%. So we reviewed all of those 50% that the computer thought might be relevant, but the other 50,000 documents we didn't look at all. So that saved our client around £60,000 in fees.
The other big class of document that wasn't very suitable for car in our case was scanned in hard copy material, which
paper, like the poor, paper is always with us.
Indeed,
it's always in
indeed.
there.
And to be fair, certain PDFs, if they're OCR searchable, will work, but in our case, it was very much old-fashioned paper that had been scanned in that the system wouldn't be able to properly process. So probably similar to Susanna, we kept that separate, and because we had that second stage review, we got those second stage reviewers busy working through that material whilst we trained the system up for the car. And
you had quite a complex coding panel, didn't you, sort of for that kind of stuff?
In terms of issues and things? Yeah, no, we did. We had it, again, this is to help us in the next stage of the process. We had flags for the different discrete items of the claim and counterclaim.
Which, sorry to interrupt, I think you didn't say it was 30?
Yeah.
So
more
quite
or less.
Complex coding panel then, 30 issues.
Absolutely. So again, the second stage review team had to be well briefed, and they obviously flagged as they went through their review.
Mm-hmm. And in terms of just finishing off on the numbers, I mean, what's the size of? At what point do you use computer-assisted review, and at what point do you say it's just not worth it? Is there a sort of magic threshold?
Oh, look, I don't think there's a magic threshold. Susanna had, 100,000 documents, you had a couple of million, and it just goes to show that actually maybe some people would think that computer-assisted review is only for the gargantuan cases, but in fact, there is a benefit. Milnet have done a bit of analysis around sort of the cost-to-benefit ratio. There's a bit of a challenge because I think a lot of the reason, and I think maybe David you could talk to this more, the risk in introducing the computer-assisted review process and the scepticism potentially that is around that means that you probably are being driven more around cost saving and other benefits in making that decision in the first place. Our cost threshold is in the region of 70,000 documents.
70,
that comes.
Okay.
Yeah, that's our number because, as you know, there's the family relationships, there's the second pass review, there's the documents that aren't compatible with technology assisted review, and that's our sort of barometer for when you actually do start to benefit from the cost saving in being able to isolate the irrelevant documents and discard those.
Depending on your size of the case you're familiar with, I mean, I don't know whether 70,000 or 100,000 is a large-scale population for litigation or a very small beer, but that's the sort of, I think, below that it's just not worth it.
I wouldn't say it's not worth it. Like I said, there's a toolkit, and once you switch it on, you switch it on. But if you're looking for cost saving,
that's in relativity. I mean, but yes, if you're going to use that process, then I think if you're 100,000, that's the figure. Anything above 100,000, it's worth doing. And being up to about 70 possibly, but certainly over. I mean, if you get once you get into 500,000, 1 million, 2 million, it's almost a no-brainer.
But touching on that scepticism idea again, if you've got a population that size and you're trying to convince the other side that by reviewing 15,000 of those documents, you've covered enough to educate a albeit slick piece of software what's relevant and what isn't relevant. It can be a bit of a hurdle, especially if they've not heard of the processes. I mean, I don't know if you mentioned this in the intro, but it's much more commonplace in America, isn't it? For example, car, and I think they've been using it for longer than
I think the technology comes from there, but interestingly, I've seen a couple of articles recently where, which is why I did the survey over here, but even more so in the States, there's a lot of noise about it, and it has been used. I think, again, it's being used a lot, but equally, and it's a much bigger population in the States, there's an awful lot of people saying, I've never used it.
Right.
And I think the Americans, and sorry if there's any Americans watching, but I'm going to make sweeping generalizations here, but the Americans are more inclined to get into how does the box work? How does that black box work? And I've got 50 different states that I can challenge you in. and therefore I might start getting into, I'm going to challenge you about how the technology works. But there have been rulings. I think that this Judge Andrew Peck is, because Americans like to go on rulings and precedent, but there have been rulings saying, well, you can use the technology, but I think you can get challenged more there. And so, yes, there's an impression it's used more, but I think there's almost as much, if not more, scepticism in the States, because it's a very useful way of throwing a brick in the works, and they argue an awful lot more about procedural points than we do. But I'm going to come on to you because you faced opposition, and I think
which is sort of why I perhaps got the incorrect perception that it was more popular in the States, because when we were looking for judicial endorsement, a lot of the sort of sightings that we had were based on US judgments and materials. And I think to keep us up to date, last week there was a judgment in the Irish
Ireland,
case,
the Irish case Quinn, Judge Quinn has come through, which is a very coherent argument for using the technology. Here in the UK, the case we in the e-disclosure world always call is Goodale. It's Goodale versus the Ministry of Justice, where Senior Master Whitaker in the Goodale case endorsed the use of technology. And so there is precedent, and that's the only precedent there is. But I think you only need one, because any case can be disposed however the judge wants.